Americans are unhappy. According to a new report from the Common Good, the U.S. has sank all the way down to 24th place in global happiness, with polarization being the top thing fueling it. Less people trust their neighbors. Communities are weaker. People are more isolated and divided. They don't have faith in the current political setup. They're craving change or a system overhaul. So what's the alternative? And would it actually be any better? What if all of a sudden life and society as we know it collapsed? That right there is where my next guest begins his new novel. Joining us now, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of the new book, The Emergency, George Packer. George, good to have you.
Always good to be with you, Katie.
So you start at the end and a new beginning, and you're reimagining what the world could look like if a government, an empire collapses. And it's an interesting political allegory to what we're going through today. Explain to me the foundation of The Emergency.
It is exactly that. It's a political allegory. By 2021, I had started to lose faith in the power of facts. January 6th happened before our eyes, and within about 3 news cycles, it meant completely different things. In fact, different things happened according to different Americans. There was just no consensus about what was real. And after years and years of writing articles and books, trying to report and explain what was happening in America, I felt a deep need to get away from it into imagination, into a deeper reality that fiction allows. It gets you, I think, closer to the feeling of what it's like today, rather than simply the first or second layer of facts and events. So one of my favorite novels is 1984 by George Orwell, and I wanted to try my hand at a political allegory that would take place in no named time, no named place, simply an empire that, as you say, collapses, dies of boredom and loss of faith in itself, which I think is kind of part of what's happening to us. And in its place rise up these youth movements, both in the city and in the countryside, that are radical and revolutionary and that disturb the lives of the people, the main characters, who are a doctor, his wife, and their 2 children who live in the city.
It disturbs the lives of the adults. I mean, when you talk about young people, you're talking about very young people who are suddenly the ones in charge. And I guess it was surprising to me and maybe scarier than other political allegories I've read, maybe even scarier than 1984, because those are the adults coming and they're in charge and they're imposing dictatorial schemes and policies, and it's scary, and there are clear punishments. This is like the thought police, but the Generation Z thought police versus the Lord of the Flies on the, what would we call the right side of politics, the left side versus the right side. The right side is much more violent and hysterical in a primitive way, and the left side is not violent and not hysterical, but very diligent and very pure.
So you're right. In the city, there's this new movement of young people called Together. It is not, there's no dictator, there's no secret police banging down doors, but there is social pressure, moral pressure, which we've lived through in this country recently, and which can be in some ways scarier than state pressure, because it's your neighbors, it's your colleagues, it's your children who are looking at you and saying, how could you ever have thought that that world that has now gone, the empire, was a just world or a good world? How could you have raised me not to imagine a better world? Which is what the daughter, the 14-year-old daughter of the doctor, is asking of her father. They'd always been very close. She'd been this brilliant student, this good girl, and when everything falls apart, she gets caught up in this movement, which is kind of a utopian perfectionist movement. They want both the moral life and the intellectual life of young people to be perfect.
They want to be better humans.
They want to be better humans, which are sort of a version of AI. There's no digital technology. You don't find any of the familiar landmarks of our world in this world, but you have the feelings, the ghosts, the echoes, and better humans are these sort of steampunk throwback robots that young people are having made to look like themselves, but to be a better version of themselves.
They're after perfection and believing that perfection is going to make the world a better place, but they're holding themselves to impossible standards.
And they're also imposing this moral pressure on everyone around them, and a kind of groupthink.
And also, but like, society doesn't work. You know, they're telling everybody they've got to think a certain way. They've got to change the names. Like, you're a healing, what is it, a healing?
Yeah, like a healing associate rather than a nurse assistant. Yeah, the language becomes very abstract, very euphemistic.
Merit becomes a problem.
Merit is a problem. There's an egalitarianism that means in the operating room where the doctor is, should be in charge, he's no longer really in charge because there's a new philosophy, which is an egalitarian one, and he can't take that. And he commits sort of a crime, a thought crime, you could say, or a speech crime that gets him ostracized. He's disgraced. He has to leave the hospital. And that sets the whole plot in motion because he needs to redeem himself, especially in the eyes of his daughter.
Who are the yeomen?
The yeomen are the people out in the countryside. So the city people are burghers. The country people are yeomen. And that reflects what I think of as like the core divide in this country between urban and small town or rural, between college educated and non-college. The yeomen have their own youth rebellion to deal with. These farm boys are gathering on farms and getting involved in this philosophy that is kind of animal worship, it's strength worship, it's male body worship. It's a kind of manosphere of the farms where they're training for some conflict. It's not clear what, but it sort of becomes evident that the conflict is going to be with the burghers, that the city and the country are going to go to some kind of war with each other.
What's interesting is I think that, so the empire falls, you never really get into the empire, and in its place are just rumors of how it happened or ideas of how it happened. And the two worlds, the yeomans, the rural folks, farm folks versus the city folk, have two very different ideas of what exactly went down. And there's no longer a truth there. There's not a shared reality. And that's just so much of what we're living through right now with the internet and with rumor and conspiracy. You can go wherever you want to get your own set of facts, your alternative facts. There's not a shared truth. And it ultimately proves that there's really nothing you can do about that, at least in the book.
That's right. That to me is scarier in some ways than physical violence.
Yeah.
If there isn't any sense that we can have in common of what is real, of what is true, we can then argue about it, but at least start from certain accepted facts. And once the empire collapses, the people in the country begin to develop these rather paranoid conspiracy theories about what's going on in the city. And the people in the city are kind of doing the same about people in the country. And when the doctor and his daughter go out into the countryside, which is sort of the main journey that the plot takes you on, they discover that people they used to know out there, sort of considered friends, don't want them there, are suspicious of them.
Maybe never really liked them to begin with.
Maybe found them condescending and not their friends to begin with. You're absolutely right. And when the doctor starts talking to this farmer, he realizes he has ideas about what's real and what the burghers are planning on doing that make absolutely no sense to him. And he will never persuade him otherwise because the farmer wants to believe it. There's some pleasure in saying, no, you are the one who's deluded. I know the truth.
What I thought was so interesting about the foundation of the book, Why the Empire Falls, is out of boredom. And you have an article in The Atlantic recently, and I have it here. It's titled, "I Don't Want to Stop Believing in America's Decency." And that seems to be the core of the book, that people stop believing in the empire itself, stop believing in the way things function. They don't think it's good or it works. And there's a generational divide. You know, there's the young people who really look at their parents and say, what are you giving us? We don't have the same opportunities you did. This world that you're handing over is not better or not good enough for us. And I think, to just leave boredom aside for 1 second, I think we have a tendency as we get older to just look at the complaints of the younger generation and say, you don't know what you're talking about, or just wait, you'll see, you haven't learned enough, you'll grow up. And this was a warning not to brush them off, to take their complaints seriously.
Right. The doctor, his overwhelming emotion is to want to hold on to his daughter, to not lose her, because he's constantly in danger of her sort of going in a direction that frightens him and where he'll lose her. So he is trying to understand her and the world that she's seeing. And the reader is able to do it too, because the first part of the book is through his perspective, but the second part, we move to her perspective. So we see what she's been feeling about him and about the collapse of the empire and about what's come after. So he wants to hold on to her. He doesn't want to just tell her, you don't know what's good for you. You just have to grow up. On the other hand, he has certain core values that he calls humanism, that are essentially listening to people, trying to understand people, compromise, sort of the old liberal values that I find are disappearing rather quickly in this country. And he doesn't want to let go of those either. So how does he keep his daughter from rejecting him and yet give her something that he thinks is of permanent value? If the empire is gone, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing he has to give her.
The reason I bring it up is I feel like we are, and wonder if we're ignoring this warning today, is there is a real dissatisfaction that younger people feel with the way things are. And you see that in polling. You also see that in the way the elections have gone. You see that with the election of Zoran Mamdani here in New York. You could say you see that with the election of Donald Trump as well. 75% of U.S. adults, just broadly, believe the country's political system needs a complete or major reform.
Wow.
And then when you get to the younger folks, they will say, Generation Z, 20% say violence can sometimes be justified in order to achieve political gain. 67% of U.S. college students hold a positive or neutral association with the word socialism. They're hungry for change and for a different way of doing things.
And the same is true on the right,
Yeah.
where the change they want seems to be more authoritarian.
Yeah.
So that is very much reflected in the novel. There are these young people called excess burgers, who are burger children, city children, who have failed their exams. There's this all-important exam that everyone has to take at age 14, and the bottom 10% are essentially discarded. They have to go into menial jobs, or they become drunks, prostitutes, beggars, they go to jail. Their lives are kind of over. And that, to me, is a picture of a meritocracy that's a little out of control, where everyone wants to get their kids into the top universities with the sense, everyone who's, got the means to, with the sense that if they don't, their kids are going to be failures. And that is a world that the daughter realizes was a completely unjust world, and her father never questioned it because that was the only world he knew. And it's important for people my age who are busy defending democracy from an authoritarian takeover to remember it has to be defended, but it also has to be justified.
It has to be believed in.
It has to be believed in, exactly. And if it's not answering basic needs, not just material, but spiritual needs and the need for meaning, then we can't just say, we have to protect democracy. We have to also say, how do we change it? How do we reform it so that another generation has a chance to
Do you think that the political parties are adequately doing that right now?
No, absolutely not. I think the Republican Party has answered a kind of dissatisfaction or alienation with a nihilistic, let's burn it all down. And
maybe a certain jingoism.
Jingoism, misogyny, bigotry, all kinds of ugly tendencies that are now just bursting out into the open everywhere. In fact, they're fighting each other over whether anti-Semitism is okay or not. So we've reached that point on that side. On the Democratic side, I think they're sort of in a crouch, defend the status quo crouch, without really doing deep, hard thinking about this is no longer the 20th century. The New Deal was almost 100 years ago. So where does the progressive movement go? And not just policy.
There's also been a strain within the Democratic Party with liberals and city folk, if you will, or highly educated folk, to be more honest about America and about our history and what what we've done, what our ideals are. And that's led to a lot of reconsidering of the past and reconsidering of America's role in the world, or role for the people, whether it's been overall good, overall bad.
Right.
The story of America doesn't have its resonance any longer.
Well, I think because we're so manic depressive that we either have this idea of American exceptionalism that we've been blessed by Providence to lead the world into liberty and democracy, or we are at heart a sinful nation, you know, corrupted from the beginning and can never really escape the original sin. And neither of those is true. We're a country. Countries have all kinds of good and bad qualities. The good qualities about our country are the ones that came out in that wonderful reading you did last time I was with you from East of Eden by Steinbeck, which is a kind of rambunctious, vulgar, but generous and open spirit that I think comes from the founding of the country.
A uniquely American spirit that you don't find anywhere else.
It is, and foreigners know that. When we're abroad, they know us immediately, regardless of what party we belong to or what background we have, because there is something about Americans, and I think it comes from the fact that we were founded with at least the ideal of equality. But that ideal kind of has the taste of ashes for a lot of young people.
Yeah, that's true. But there is still a real desire. And I was talking to a friend the other day who is trying to get her citizenship. She's been here a long time, but she's not a citizen. And she, you know, she's very liberal and very progressive. And she told me that she's so excited and so proud to become an American. And she hopes it comes through. And I said, what do you say to people who maybe in your circle who don't feel the same way? And she's like, I tell them off. I tell them how wrong they are, because this is still an exceptional place. This just is still a better place than anywhere else in the world. There is a reason why you're seeing people, you know, walk for weeks through terrible, dangerous terrain to get here. There's a reason why there is a flood of immigration to this country, because it is a better place to live.
And I hate seeing our leaders, one by one, defiling all those things that make the country a place where people around the world want to go. People come here and immediately feel there's a kind of welcome here. There's all kinds of different people. It's not like I stick out as a foreigner, because everyone here in some ways was a foreigner. And that spirit was and is so much what I love about the country, makes me proud of it. There's a lot of things that don't make me proud, and now here we are.
But you can hold those two things at the same time.
Absolutely.
Both can be true. Let's talk about strangers. I want to talk about immigration.
Yeah. So there's a third group in the novel, in addition to burghers and yeomen, and they're called strangers. They are a kind of semi-nomadic people who are not from the empire, but from across the mountains on the border of the empire. And when the empire collapses and the border guards leave their posts, the strangers who've been dealing with a long-term drought begin to cross the mountains into yeoman country and eventually into the city.
They would be the migrants in the story.
They would be the migrants. They play a key role in the novel because one man in particular, Mr. Monge, who is a stranger father who has pretty much abandoned his son. There's a kind of theme of parents and children estranged from each other in all three of these groups, burghers, yeomen, strangers. He arrives in the city, and when the doctor hears about his son who's been stranded out in the countryside and is wounded and needs help, this is the doctor's chance at redemption for the disgrace he has brought upon himself. So he decides, I'm going to go out. I know approximately where the boy is. I'm going to find him. I'm going to take care of him as a doctor, and I'm going to bring him back to the city. And his daughter, the doctor's daughter, at the last moment says, I'm coming with you. So it's really a father-daughter journey that most of the novel describes.
It's interesting because the way the strangers are welcomed or perceived among the different groups in the book, the yeomen, you know, the rural countryside folks see them as dangerous and the enemies, and they are very wary of them. Whereas
stealing livestock and crossing their farms, et cetera.
Exactly. And the city people are lifting them up as if they're gods.
Right. To the city people, to the young people of Together, the new movement, the strangers whose language they don't speak, who they really don't know, they're able to project onto this blank screen a fantasy of ideal people, which is what Together is trying to create. So the strangers who are poor, desperate, trying to find a safe place, just trying to keep body and soul together and live, to the young burghers become these kind of divine figures.
Why did you want to do a book that dealt with the illusions are pretty striking? You know, you have the rural city divide, then the stranger. Why did you want to introduce the stranger into this? And what does it have to do with the migration we've been witnessing?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking all that directly of our border and of, in fact, I started writing it well before the mass deportations began.
Yeah, but the border has been the dominant political issue now for 10 years.
I was not, throughout the novel, Katie, I'm not trying to say this equals this, that equals that. What I'm trying to do is use intuitions that lead me to create things like the strangers as a group that must come from somewhere. Where do they come from? From our world, from our society, but to take them into another place so that the reader has this feeling of being in a strange world that nonetheless makes our world somehow clearer in a way that journalism doesn't. You're not reading facts, you're reading imagination, but you're feeling something that you might not have known you were feeling until you read it.
Whose quote is it? I forgot the author of the quote. But the truism, which is that you can get all the facts right and still miss the story, and get only some of the facts right, but still get the essence of the story. And I think we feel that way in journalism right now, where sometimes we're missing the bigger picture. We're getting all the facts right, but maybe we're missing the bigger picture of what's going on in the world. I want to ask you about the thing that I glossed over a second ago, and this is believing in America's decency. I thought so much about the Atlantic article that you wrote about wanting to believe in us in this country when I was reading this book, because it feels like, even though it's not a direct comparison, it does feel like the way that we lose this country, the way that we lose America and the democracy that we created and was the envy of the world, is by not believing it any longer, getting bored of it.
And by allowing that boredom to drive us into words and actions that might even have very little justification. They might not be necessary, but there's a kind of nihilism that allows you to do things that you know are destructive. This book moves toward a civil war. I mean, it's a bleak picture of how the burghers and the yeomen are going to end up confronting each other. Why do they hate each other? It's not clear. Maybe because we human beings need to hate someone. And we always find reasons, or we make them up. We talk about Haitians eating cats and dogs if we need a group to hate. It's an easy thing, a tempting thing, and an incredibly dangerous thing, because once it starts, it's just so hard to reverse it, to return to some kind of decency. But it's not all grim. I hope you didn't end it feeling this is an entirely depressing picture, because for me, the novel is about the need to hold on to human bonds, to hold on to what connects us to each other and gives life meaning. And the doctor, not just with his family, but with everyone he meets along the way on this journey, there's some need for a connection without which we're lost.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the book. As I told you when you walked in, I read it in just over 2 days. I finished reading it this morning. I neglected some of my daily duties to finish reading the book because I thought it was wonderful. No, don't apologize. You gave me, honestly, it was a real great break from my life to dive into this thought experiment, this world that you created. And the ending is noxious, I guess I could say, is fragrant in a bad way, but there is hope there, and I don't want to give too much of it away, but there are connections, and there are moments and glimpses of human decency that I think are inspiring, and I think it's important for us to all hold on to that in our daily lives.
It ends with the doctor back home from this journey.
Do you want to give it all away?
Not all of it. I'm just going to be very vague about it. He's back in his house, and he's with his wife from whom he's been sort of estranged. And there's a lot they have to try to understand and forgive. But the family is in this house, and people are coming into the house because there's a war going on outside. And the doctor and his wife are opening the door. They are not leaving the door shut. They're not locking people out. And that's sort of the key image at the end, is if we keep the door, if we keep opening the door, if we keep the hope of some human connection, even if we don't understand these people and we're even afraid of them, then there's hope for us.
Again, I loved it. I've recommended it to so many people, including my brother, my husband. My mom is going to love it. I'm going to give it to her. I've recommended it to a reading group. I just think it was a really, really great, great read and a fascinating, again, thought experiment about an alternate universe where it all falls apart and how it can be remade. George Packer, thanks so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you for reading me. Thank you for talking to me.
Congrats on the book.
Thanks.